Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We welcome you once again this evening to the airwaves of Salam Media. Wednesday nights with myself, Inayet Wadee. It is on this Wednesday evening. The time is just gone, a minute past 7 p.m. as we welcome our listeners, our viewers to the various platforms of Salam Media. And we have got two quite lively panel discussions on tonight. The first from now right until 8 p.m., we are talking about the water crisis in South Africa. And for a very, very long time now, we have seen this unfolding. And we've got to a stage where last week we spoke to a number of local councillors with regard to the water problems in their areas. There was an area that was without water for close on to 7 days. Now, we see a lot playing out as far as the blame game is concerned, whether we're talking about load shedding that is now resulted in water shedding, the issues surrounding reservoirs that are running dry, pumping issues, maintenance. All these things have been playing out for a very, very long time. We knew that we were going to be picking up a problem with water. And as a result, we've got two experts on the field this evening. We've got Petrus Venter, who is the Deputy Regional Director, Water Resource Management. And we also have got Dr. Anthony Turton, a trained scientist specializing in water resource management. I see Petrus Venter already on screen, and I see Dr. Anthony Turton. To both of you gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Yes, Petrus, we're going to obviously start off, and the point I had made in my introduction is, are we surprised that we are sitting with a water crisis at this point in time?
Well, we shouldn't be surprised because all our water systems are driven by electricity. And it was only a matter of time if we start running out of capacity, if we had such severe and prolonged load shedding as we have now experienced the last few months. So it is unfortunate that we are now start getting to critical stages that reservoirs have run dry and there is just not enough time in between to get the reservoirs full. That, to say, also means that where the water need to be purified is also plants that are running with electricity. So there is no purification that can take place. And, the whole chain of pumping water from the resource, which if we talk about the biggest water user, Rand Water, which provide, most of the Gauteng, Johannesburg, Tshwane, Centurion, all of those places, up to Rustenburg with water. If there is not electricity to pump the water from the resource, to purify it and to pump it all over the watershed, that is intense amount of electricity that are needed for that. So we are not surprised, but we are very disillusioned with the situation.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Anthony, just looking at, obviously, load shedding is one issue. But for a long time, we've heard about South Africa getting to a stage where we will be a water scarce nation. We know about unreliable, insufficient rainfalls, the whole question surrounding climate change, which has also been quite a problematic. And this has been going on for the last few years. And looking at where we are in terms of managing the process, considering what we know as far as the reasons behind the water crisis go. I mean, how far have we actually come? Have we realized how serious this situation is actually going to get?
The first book that I'm aware of that's ever been written about water shortages in South Africa goes back to 1850. Around about that period of time, was written in the Cape Colony by a man called Brown, Mr. Brown, J.C. Brown. And a decade later, another book was written about dam building, water finding, and that was written by the a road engineer, Thomas Bain, who went on to become the first director of the Department of Irrigation that was started. And he was the first guy in 1860, plus minus. He wrote this book, and in that book he proposed that we will need to transfer water from the Orange River, Garib River, to Port Elizabeth eventually. And he was actually the guy that promulgated the idea of the Orange Fish Sundays interbasin transfer scheme that only happened in 1961, around about then. So in other words, it took 100 years from the vision to the reality. But the important point I want to make is that we've been talking about this since the mid-1800s. It is not a new thing at all. South Africa has always been water constrained. That is why we've created the Department of Water Affairs in order to manage the water constraints of the country.
Yes, and also I think looking at where we are as far as management of the resource is concerned, Petrus, because this is absolutely important for us to understand how well are we managing the situation, considering what Dr. Anthony Turner is saying, that we've known this for well over 100 years already.
Yes, the department have taken absolute, cognizance of, and also have grabbed it with our legislation, which have come just as far as Anthony are referring to. We're talking about water legislation in South Africa of more than a century. But with our latest international legislation, which was all in line with international thinking and United Nations approach, which the department have published in 1998, there was quite a lot of focus that the department have started drawing towards these challenges that we have in terms of water. In fact, actually, I came from a National Water Resource Strategy 3 workshop, stakeholder workshop today, where we shared some of these visions and principles and action plans, and even getting people's input towards it. So the department is very well committed, but as usual, we do sit with significant challenges in terms of implementation. And the department's focus over the last at least 20, 25 years was to get the backlog of our water services and, the access of water for the previous disadvantage. So I get a feeling that there was, in some cases, even a purposeful neglect of certain infrastructure for the purpose to give water and access to water to the various rural communities. We have to just acknowledge in this, it is not a cheap exercise to have done, but it has caught up on us. The absolute reality is that the department sit with a latest announcement, also been confirmed by the president, that we need to draw in civil society and the public in this whole integrated approach towards our more efficient use of our water resources. So there is this, we can go into a lot of detail of local municipalities and the non-performance in terms of the wastewater systems, which is certainly not only a wastewater plant, it's a whole network, which are served with many manholes and pump stations. And if it starts failing and not being maintained, and you get even deterioration that stretches of our thousands of kilometers of sewer networks that we have in this country, it is not been maintained well, and we are reaching a crisis in terms of that aspect as well.
Well, certainly, and also Petrus and also Dr. Anthony, talking about in fact, Petrus talks about an integrated approach and looking at the entire management system. And sometimes we actually look at things very simplistically. We say that the dams are full, we've had good rainfall. Why are we experiencing a water shortage? But I'm sure, from a technical aspect, there is a lot more that people need to think about and we need to consider. Dr. Anthony?
Yes, I have been muted. I've been unmuted. Okay. Look, I think it's very important to understand that you correctly say water is extremely complicated. And while it might be emotionally appealing to blame the Department of Water and Sanitation, they actually have got, with respect, a fairly limited role in this whole process, because you must appreciate that they are only responsible for the resource, which means water in the river and dams. They are not responsible for the reticulation of water out of the rivers into the various reticulation systems and ultimately into municipalities. So, in fact, there's a constitutional clause known as the Cooperative Governance Clause that prevents one government department from getting involved in the affairs of another government department. And in my professional opinion, this is a problem, because it means that the Department of Water Affairs is unable to act as a regulator, because it's in fact a player and a referee at the same time. And one of the problems is that we've allowed the municipalities to become delinquent over an extended period of time, to the extent that for them to play catch up now is going to be such an enormous task that in many cases it is impossible. And when I say impossible, I look no further than Mfuleni, where I'm sure you have some listeners in that area. Mfuleni has been a walking disaster for some years now. At least 2 billion rand has been spent on trying to fix the sewage systems there. 2 billion rand, that's a lot of money, and they're still no closer today to fixing those systems. So, the department has got very little control over that. And I know, as I say that in their defense, it's a complex issue. And I think that we need to ultimately start looking at this constitutional issue. It's in our collective best interest to get that resolved, because clearly we need a strong regulator. And we obviously need to be able to intervene in municipalities before they become so delinquent that they are unable to self-correct.
Exactly. I think also, when one looks at the problem and one drills down and trying to get to the bottom of fixing the problems. Now, clearly, Petrus, one of the first things that we need to acknowledge that water provision is a serious problem. And as societies, as the government, as the people, as those who are providing water, have we really admitted that water provision is a serious problem in the country?
Yes, that is, the department is not quiet on that aspect. We must also just see how this whole snowball are actually taking over. So if you do not maintain infrastructure like local municipalities, then you sit with a much bigger problem, and that is that, even the little bit of water that you do have in your system, you cannot even account for it. There is so much leakages and non-accountable water, and the average of unaccountable water or non-revenue water, it means municipalities that receive a certain amount of water, either from their own systems or getting it from water boards as a service provider, they cannot account for about 50%. There's municipalities that is more and there's municipalities that less, but we're sitting with a rough average of 50% nationwide of water that is in the system that cannot be even accountable. There is, of course, illegal collections, it is leakages, and you are dealt frequently with very upset public that say, the road is busy washing away. This is now weeks and months, and municipalities do not come and fix the pipe, and the amount of water that get lost through this unaccountable water is not small. If we really look at the reality of 50% is half of the water already been paid for that need to reach the user, do not reach the user. And the municipality cannot actually invoice for such water, and which also then include for non-revenue water also illegal uses.
Yes, and also, Dr. Anthony, where do we start fixing the problem? Do we start right at the top? We've got the Department of Cooperative Governance, we've got Traditional Affairs, and these are obviously regulating the municipalities. So there we have a number of issues that have arisen over a period of time, and especially in the last few years. Then we're speaking about municipalities. Do we have qualified people? Do we have the skills? Do we have qualified engineers? Where do we actually start fixing? And, as Petrus speaks about water affairs, and the Department of Water Affairs obviously has done exceptional work, but there is still a lot more that needs to be done, particularly when one looks at it from a government perspective and also from a policy perspective. I mean, are the policies at this point in time, as far as water is concerned, management of water, the integrated approach that you speak about, are these policies sufficient?
I can say without any fear of contradiction that the policies we have in South Africa in general, as certainly as embedded in the National Water Act, are world-class policies. When the National Water Act came out in 1998, it was widely lauded throughout the world as being extremely progressive and, in fact, cutting edge. This whole notion of integrated water resource management was very much in vogue in the 90s. It's not so much in vogue at the moment because of the complexity arising from the implementation of an integrated system. So yes, in general, our laws are very, very far-reaching. However, the implementation is not. And I'm now going to be a little bit hard-hitting because I'm going to say that one of the biggest single sources of pollution in South Africa today is the unmitigated flow of raw, untreated sewage into our rivers and dams. That's probably the biggest single source of water. And in fact, I've recently been told that of the total volume of water that Rand Water pumps into the Gauteng area, something like 90% of that water returns back as sewage, effluent return flows. And this is way, way bigger than the acid mine drainage problem, way, way bigger than any other industrial pollution problem that I'm aware of, which unfortunately opens up a very, very sad situation when we can now say that the state, particularly in the form of the municipal level of government, is the biggest single polluter of its own water. Now, this is a serious indictment, and it's not a water affairs problem because they are the people that are supposed to implement the act, but they've got no authority over municipalities because of this cooperative governance clause I mentioned in the Constitution. So as long as the state continues to be the biggest single polluter of water in the country, they also lose the moral authority to implement that law. And we're starting to see widespread all over the show now. I see people just completely blatantly ignoring the fact that there is a law about this. They just don't care because they don't believe that the government has the capacity anymore to prosecute. Now, this is a very dangerous situation because it means that the moral authority of the state is being questioned, and the ability of the state to project authority over its entire geographic area is now also starting to be questioned. And this is a very, very dangerous situation that goes way beyond the water supply. Something that is, that is actually, in my professional opinion, something of national security implications in this thing. So it is a very, very serious problem that we are dealing with. It's not trivial or frivolous by any stretch of imagination, and it doesn't help to point fingers at people. And in this whole value chain, the Department of Water Affairs is probably one of the good people, so to speak, the good guys, rather than one of the bad guys.
Yes, Dr. Anthony, and also Petrus, looking at South Africa, and we know that we are one of the most unequal countries in the world. And even when it comes to water provision, you spoke about the rural areas and also looking at the urban areas. And there have been obviously interventions in the past looking at reducing demand in the urban areas and also at the same time, creating all sorts of awareness campaigns, whether it's to educate urban citizens. We're talking about, being water conscious, safe water. How do we use grey water, water used for bathing, for washing dishes, clothing, all those type of things. We've had these campaigns over and over again. And yet it appears as if we still seem to be unstuck. And this provision of unequal water distribution is still a major problem. I think you muted, Petrus. There we go.
Am I muted?
Okay, you're fine now. Yes.
Okay. What I wanted to say is that there is a natural unequal reality that we need to face. I mean, rural people are rural, and urban areas are the economic hubs, and it is much more efficient and easier to provide to urbanized areas, although we do not even see this happening with the informal settlements well enough, but it is by far much easier to provide urban areas with sufficient water than for scattered rural areas. So we should just compare apples with apples before you start doing so. But there is certainly unequal distribution that we still sit with. But this unequal distribution cut on all different sectors. If you look in urban areas, you might find that people, you drive along the road and you see, but we have now this crisis of water, but look, this person now even wetting his garden. So the people that have access to water have most of the time also access to finance. And that is something that you cannot, as a government department, address without looking at a more holistic approach to its water problem. Where there is, of course, if I'll just touch a little bit on the urban comparison with rural areas, which will always be unequal. That you would not have a rural house that will have the availability of the same volume of water that a person in a well-established economic urban area would be able to have just for the luxury of green grass. That unequal thing will always exist, but there is certain sectors, and that is where we deal about who are really the biggest water user, and that is where unequal actions which the Department of Environmental Affairs and Agriculture are having a lot of focus to bring water in the agricultural sector also to the sector and the previous disadvantage. And we mustn't just look at where we are, we should also look at how far have we proceeded, because being in the active field, there is beautiful examples, and there's percentages that are growing by the day, how people are being allocated with water and land in the agricultural sector.
Yes, but also, Dr. Anthony, as simple as it may sound, there is definitely a bigger picture that one needs to look at when we're talking about a water crisis. Sometimes, and as I mentioned right up front, we look at things very, very simplistically. And but this is what the layman sees, Dr. Anthony Turner. This is what we see on a day-to-day basis. I mean, last week, there were parts of Johannesburg close on to 7 days without water. We hear of many areas now, even in urban areas, without water for 7-8 hours. We hear of critical services, hospitals, for instance, the Helen Joseph Hospital, the Rahima Musa Hospital, being without water. Now, clearly, we have got a major problem, even when we're talking about interventions in the urban area, creating this water awareness. Somewhere along the line, something is just going horribly wrong.
Yes, I agree with you. I live in KZN now. I live on the south coast, and we've got parts of the south coast that have not had water for months on end. Places like Ramsgate that literally for months. I mean, I don't know how they survive, but months they don't have water. There's a local Port Shepstone Regional Hospital here that hasn't had water for I don't know how long. There was an uprising by their professional staff at one point in time because of the hepatitis A problem that was going around, and in fact, some of the professionals went on strike because they were unable to wash their hands between surgical procedures. So this crisis it's not been covered by the media simply because it's out there in the rural areas or the less covered areas. It just happens to be coming now into the urban centres. It came to Cape Town in 2018. It's currently in Port Elizabeth area. It's in Durban. It's moving up into Gauteng now. So all of this is something that we've known about for a long period of time. And the simple reality is that South Africa, as with the rest of the world, we're running into limitations on the available of fresh water supplies globally. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, because the good news is that water is an infinitely renewable resource. The volume of water we have on the planet today is the same volume we had when the dinosaurs were walking around. And in fact, we don't actually have a water problem. We really have a salt problem. We've got too much salt. It's not that we haven't got enough water. We simply have too much salt in the water that we have. The total volume of water on the planet, only about 2% of it is fresh water. So we're seeing huge amounts of progress being made, in fact, from the Middle East. I'm currently working in the Middle East on a number of projects, and one of them have been driven by the Saudi Arabian government. They are driving the cost of desalination down to 30 US cents per cubic meter, and their vision is to take it down to 20 US cents per kiloliter. This is now on par with what it costs us to treat our surface water, and very soon it's going to be cheaper than what it costs us to take our polluted water out of a river and treat it. So this is an example of very progressive government policy that's been put in place. And in fact, if you want to, I can go into more details there, because they've got a completely new business model, but I don't want to fuddle the conversation on that matter. But nonetheless, what I'm saying is that with technology and with capital and with a vision by government, we can most certainly overcome these problems. They're not necessarily catastrophic problems, but we do need a government policy to give us certainty. At the moment, there is no certainty, and in particular, this whole issue about desalination. There's a very strong anti-desalination lobby that's at work, and we need to take those people on, because they are inhibiting progress to a very significant extent.
Yes, Dr. Anthony, just while you are on the subject and you raise the issue of Saudi Arabia, because we know the conditions in Saudi Arabia, desert-like conditions, and I mean, if they obviously are progressive, is what you say, and they will achieve, they will overcome, to a large extent, they would overcome a water crisis that they could be facing. I mean, what South Africa, I mean, why are we not even considering this?
Well, this is a government policy issue. This is a political matter. This is not a technical problem. This is a political issue. We've got to get the political masters, if you like, the political leadership. They have to start embracing the technical people. At the moment, I would go so far as to say that the technical people have largely been bypassed and marginalized, and the policy of cadre deployment has simply exacerbated that very ugly reality. So we get into this situation where it doesn't have to be a doom and gloom outcome. In fact, it can be a very, very good outcome. And seeing as we're talking about the Saudis, I'll just tell you what their business model now is. The Saudis have said that why should we take expensive technology to produce low-cost drinking water where people do not want to pay for the market-related prices for it? Where's the business model in that particular case? And they've said, no, we shouldn't do that. Instead of producing cheap drinking water, what we should be doing is we should be concentrating salt so that we've got 100% pure salt, which has got a lot of other minerals inside it. Our business should be the concentration of salt, the selling of the chemically pure substances in salt, and then the byproduct of that happens to be water, and that water is now a waste product, which we can even give it away because it's already paid for in the other production process. So I think that's a very, very clever business model. And the other important thing that's happening in the world of technology now is that the renewable industry is going through somewhat of a revolution now with hydrogen technology. So hydrogen technology is now starting to replace battery technology, and that's got great importance because hydrogen is derived from splitting hydrogen and oxygen. In other words, you put electric current through water and you get hydrogen and oxygen. It's a way of storing energy in water, and that's an important thing because the way they do that is actually through seawater, and we now get energy as a byproduct there, and it's the convergence of this hydrogen technology and desalination technology that is very soon going to make desalination way cheaper than treating water from the surface. And I'll just close in saying that some years ago I was commissioned as an external reviewer for a 10-year strategic action plan by one of the states in Australia, Vic Water, the state of Victoria. And in the state of Victoria, they asked me to do this review, and I learned there a lot of things. And the one thing that I learned is that they've gone onto the desalination route. As a result of that, they've left the water in the rivers. And would you believe it that the rivers, the aquatic ecosystems, are now starting to rehabilitate themselves? So we have this bizarre situation whereby we are applying the latest cutting-edge technology or space-age technology, if you like, to actually rehabilitate ancient ecosystems. So this is a remarkable story, and very few people actually ever pick it up. So the bottom line is that it's actually a good news story in the water sector. If we can get that policy certainty coming out, and if we can get through conversations like this, if we can start getting investment and not investment in capital because there's lots of capital, that's not the problem, but just starting to get people to support this idea.
Yes. Now, Petrus, I've just seen, in fact, earlier on, I've seen one or two comments come through from listeners, and I just want to touch a bit on the skills and to ensure that we've got qualified people in this country and ensuring, even looking at outside the large metros, for instance, we know that municipalities are actually struggling to attract qualified engineers, and Dr. Anthony Turner alluded to cadre deployment. And, a lot of these problems are as a result, as we see it in Eskom as well. Eskom has got a severe skills shortage. And there was a time when many qualified engineers were actually allowed to actually go, or they were forced to resign, to leave. And this is the result why we are seeing this huge problem as far as Eskom is concerned, particularly when it comes to maintenance and some of the other issues. Are we having a similar problem as far as water and management of water, particularly looking at the shortage of the skills base in this country?
Are you asking me or are you asking Petrus?
Petrus.
Okay.
Yes, I think there is a natural shortage that is happening everywhere. There's a dynamics. Government, if I can talk about water affairs, has becoming a training platform for the whole water sector. And I hope that we can continue to be that and even improve on that, because there has been decline and not the same type of commitment with political changes that has happened. So, there's new people coming in every day. There are people are picking up experience and they're leaving the department and hopefully leaving towards the water sector where they benefit the greater whole water balance. And if I can just think about my water career and how many people have worked for me, and some of them are now top in the department, top in water boards. So yes, we shouldn't be too much alarming, because I do not think that we sit with a critical, knowledge crisis in water affairs or in the strong water boards even. But what there is a reality on is that we have fallen back so far in terms of previous neglect that we touch on, that there is a bigger demand, and that there's certainly, the system is also not geared to easily recover or bring in people that have left a municipality. If an engineer left, I don't think it is only a matter that they cannot attract people. There are also other personal issues involved in sourcing the correct people that they want, and labor aspects and quotas and all of that. I do think that the whole sector can benefit with a much better dedicated skills training program, of which there is a lot. There's academies with Rand Water, there's a Water Affairs Academy, but I do think it do not pick up on my first statement. There's a natural migration of exiting skills in the Water Affairs, which is the biggest role player. But I do not think that we are all the time doing as good as we're supposed to do. But I don't think it is as to a point that we would say that there is not capacity within the system. I know that there's a lot of call out, and many times municipalities not being able to attract engineers. But there are complicating factors that I just want to mention, that is not only a matter that we do not have skills, it is also a matter of that we cannot unlock the skills that we do have due to this crisis environment that we are operating in.
Thank you for that. Dr. Anthony, there is all this talk in South Africa about renewable energy solutions and moving away from coal. And I'm just trying to understand the link between a renewable energy and water, because there are those who hold the view, and you can confirm this, that as we move away from coal-fired power stations, and the sooner we move to other forms of energy solutions, we will actually reduce the water requirements, for want of a better term. Is that the case?
Yes. Okay. This is a complex topic, so let's try and make it as simple as possible for the listeners. I think the start of the journey would be to say that for every kilowatt hour of electricity produced, we burn 1 kilogram of coal and about 1.5, let's call it 1.5 liters of water, so 1.5 kilograms of water per kilowatt hour of electricity. So for electricity, we need both water and energy. Both water and coal. That's an important thing. That's the first thing we need to understand. The second thing we need to understand now is that a decision was made many, many years ago in the 1950s to 60s that because our coal is the foundation of our economy, and the coal happens to be in Mpumalanga and parts of northern KZN, you've got to move the water to where the coal is rather than move the coal to where the water is. So the systems have been engineered over decades to pump vast quantities of water uphill to the power stations. So you can't easily change that flow around. So those are two very, very important things. Now, the third important thing that we need to understand is that there's a fundamental problem with renewable energy, and that fundamental problem is that the energy that you get from renewables, either wind or ocean currents or solar, is generally out of kilter with the demand for that energy. So you get peak energy from the sun in the middle of the day, but your energy demand might well be the middle of the night. So you've got to store that energy somewhere. That I would say is the Achilles heel of the renewable energy space. You have to store the energy somewhere. So let's go back now to what I said earlier on about us moving water from where it is, for example, KZN, the Tugela River, up into Gauteng. What happened in the past was that the surplus energy that was not used on the national grid was used to pump water uphill over the Drakensberg Mountains. And it was stored in a dam on top of the Drakensberg Mountain, the Sterkfontein Dam. And when there was a peak demand for energy on the Eskom grid, they would release the water down into what is now Gauteng side, and they would recover about 60% of the energy that they put into pumping it. So in other words, Sterkfontein Dam is like a battery. We store our national surplus energy in that battery, and there are other dams as well. It's not only Sterkfontein. There are a couple of them in South Africa, one down in Cape Town area, and there are a few of them around. But those can no longer function anymore as they were designed, for the simple reason that we don't have surplus energy on the grid anymore. So that is also a problem we need to understand. But now we enter this new technology that I told you about, this hydrogen fuel technology. Up until now, all energy has generally been stored in batteries, and the cost of batteries is absolutely massive. I'm working with a company in the Middle East at the moment, the UAE right now. They're a battery manufacturing company, and they've got all kinds of very sophisticated batteries. But nonetheless, the battery storage is the problem. And the cost of batteries and the cost of replacement and the life cycle of the battery, this is always your problem. Elon Musk, for example, is getting into that battery storage space as an example. And he's said he's going to give Australia free batteries, etc., just to prove the technology. But now we've got this new technology that's come out, this hydrogen fuel cell. And what the hydrogen fuel cell has done is it's turned the whole storage problem into a solution. Instead of having to store energy in a battery, now you store energy in water, because what you do is when your wind turbines are working in the middle of the day or when the wind's blowing and you're producing more energy than you need, you divert that energy into an electrical flow through water, where the electricity goes through water, splits hydrogen and oxygen. You get hydrogen coming out one side, oxygen on the other side, and your energy is now stored in the hydrogen. But you then put that hydrogen just in a gas cylinder, and you put it wherever you want to have it. You put it in a motor car, for example, with a hydrogen fuel cell. And that hydrogen fuel cell is a relatively small reactor. And what it does is it converts the oxygen, the hydrogen in the cylinder. It converts it back, links it with oxygen in the atmosphere, and the byproduct is energy and water. So the hydrogen fuel cell thing is of great strategic importance. And you're seeing now progressive governments in the world have decided they're going to go in this route. And there are two things I'll say about that. The first thing is that the German government has decided to go very much into that direction, and they are busy acquiring the rights for Namibia. Namibia, the most water-constrained country in Africa, the German government is currently acquiring the rights to the sunshine in Namibia for hydrogen manufacture. So that's a very important thing that's happening. And the second thing that I draw your attention to is that there was a recent space flight by Jeff Bezos, the man that owns Amazon, and his space flight, a commercial space flight, was powered by hydrogen fuel cells. So I would say that in the not too distant future, you're going to see Amazon products being delivered to your doorstep by drones that are powered by hydrogen fuel cells. A hydrogen economy is here with us without any question of doubt. And this is something that progressively minded people would start looking at and investing heavily into. So this is the work that I do now in the international space is looking at technologies and technology convergences and the business models that support those technologies. And this is a strong trend that I'm seeing coming out now. And the UAE is certainly going in that direction very strongly. And I think in the not too distant future, South Africa will also start doing it.
Anthony Turner, it's been such a pleasure, obviously, having you on and sharing what you have, because this is information that doesn't come, to us and to our listeners, to our viewers, and to the country at large. In fact, there's just so much value that you're bringing to this discussion, apart from just describing the water crisis, but looking at some of these solutions. But also, Petrus, looking at South Africa, are there other available sources of water that are underutilized in the country? For instance, groundwater, because for a long time, this has been a topic of discussion as well, pumping up the groundwater, because we've got millions of cubic meters of water or reserves that is lying under our feet or hidden in the ground.
Certainly there is resources that is not been fully utilized, and groundwater might count under it. But, working in the water field and dealing with the whole water balance, including groundwater, uh, you know, I do want to differ with many, I want to call it academic statements. I once had a international group here with Germans, and the point come out to say that South Africa do not utilize the groundwater well enough. There is far more groundwater than surface water. Now, coming from Germany, he have made a correct statement. But in South Africa, groundwater, and that is what very few people uh, do realize, is that what is the source of groundwater? It's rainwater that infiltrate into the ground. And there are areas where there's sandy and dolomitic areas that you can get very high recharge, meaning from the amount of water that is raining, 5% to 8% in dolomitic areas can recharge, and in sandy aquifers. I mean, if there's a rain event in the desert with sand dunes, that water just filtrates through right to the consolidated geology, and it's lying there underneath. But unfortunately, if the same amount of water fall in the Karoo on a rocky mountain, there is not even 0.5% infiltration. So there is ancient water, and we all know about where that water exists. And dolomitic water has geology have the ability to store underground chambers, and all of that areas are also known. But to say that there is such an untapped groundwater is really not. It's an illusion that there is so much groundwater. I've been involved with many of the boreholes being drilled. You find many times at the rural community, people start settling. Government bring in and start drilling water for them. Either by the municipality or through our municipal infrastructure grant, that there's groundwater resources being developed. Within a very short period, if some of that boreholes don't even last 5 years, what is really happening, and Anthony would know my fame to claim, is my awareness around desertification. So if communities, even urban footprints, mining and industry, all of them are starting to change their surface usage. And what you're really doing is you remove vegetation, and let's look, everybody can identify with an urban area. It was natural veld, wetlands, streams, vegetation. But if you go to Johannesburg today, it is hard surfaces, roads, buildings, and if there's a rain event, that water are rushing towards our Hartbeespoort Dam from Johannesburg. Within 11 hours, that flood is in and through the Hartbeespoort Dam. So the sponge effect, the recharge of groundwater, you can just go to Ivory Park, Olifantsfontein, Tembisa. You go to Olifantsfontein. There's nobody that can show me Olifantsfontein. It don't exist. The whole wetland system, what was a massive sponge system that was existing there, is totally, that dolomitic eyes and the wetland system have seeped water when it rained over the winter months. The rivers was flowing with the water that just almost drained out of a sponge area of the catchment. Unfortunately, that is not what is happening with all the development, right from our urban deserts, our mining and industrial deserts, and our agricultural deserts. We reduce the recharge. If you take out the vegetation, there is more evaporation. The soil can heat up in a agricultural land that you cannot walk with your feet there. We use so much water to cool the soil to plant maize, on to plant vegetables. So we need to go, as Anthony mentioned, to in water use efficiency. It is just not efficient to produce certain vegetation or certain vegetables in open land anymore. We need to go for hot houses where you have controlled environment, that you can actually control the heat with shadow. The peak of the day, you cannot even walk in Johannesburg with bare feet. The cars can hardly drive because that street can reach 80 degrees Celsius. That is the type of urban deserts that we create. So I am unfortunately have to break the absolute reality in our modern civilization create modern deserts, which result in more flooding and runoff and less groundwater recharge. So there is a declining groundwater resource that we need to consider with the, and we all know now that we are in a heat wave. But, you know, the amount of evaporation that happened at this moment is very close to 2 millimeters of evaporation per day. So there is actually more water evaporating in one day. Just to give you a very quick comparison, it can rain in Johannesburg 600 to 680 millimeters of rain, but it evaporates per year about 1.3 meters, more than double the amount of evaporation happening. So there is a deficit of water, and the biggest water user is the sun. And unfortunately, as how sad it is, there's very, very little. Everybody talk about global warming and climate change. And today, specialists in the National Water Resource Strategy 3 have made the statement is that man is the biggest cause of climate change. And that part can be addressed with very intense awareness and education systems. And I can just say the department have done quite a lot. We had a communication center fully operational here at the Hartbeespoort Dam, where this water use efficiency, rainwater harvesting, many of these concepts
Petrus has just frozen for some reason or the other. Dr. Anthony Turner, the one aspect I'd like to also talk about is making the polluters pay, because I think this is absolutely important. Looking at, we've seen a lot when we talk about mining, sand mining, destroying rivers, mines dumping heavy metals into the water, and just looking at environmental legislation and the enforcement of the law, particularly on polluters. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, okay. I'll gladly answer that question. Can I just please make one more point on this groundwater issue, if I may, with your permission?
Yes, please do.
If we look, I agree with Petrus on this groundwater story. It's grossly overrated by European people that come here and tell us what to do. I'll give you some numbers. Of 100 units of rain that fall over the whole area of South Africa, 100 units of rain falling, 8 units of that end up in the river, and 1 unit ends up going into groundwater. The rest of that ends up as evaporation. So I'll say it again, 100 units of rain falling over South Africa. On average, 8 units go into the river and 1 unit go into the ground. That's 9 units together. That means that 91 units of rain get lost to evaporation immediately. And I'll reinforce that by saying that the Vaal Dam, which is the biggest single source of supply for Gauteng, more water is lost from the Vaal Dam for 11 months of the year than flows in under natural conditions. So if there wasn't water from the Tugela and from the Lesotho Highlands coming into the Vaal River, it would get smaller, even if you didn't use the water. Evaporation would simply make it get smaller and smaller and smaller all the time. So these are the realities about groundwater. Our problem is not a shortage of water. Our problem is an abundance of evaporation. We lose more than 90% of our water is lost to evaporation. That is our problem. Okay, that's the one issue. Now you asked me about the polluter pays. The polluter pays is a very interesting concept because, firstly, I said earlier on that the biggest single polluter of the resource in South Africa at the moment is the state. In other words, government is the biggest polluter through municipalities' defunct sewage works. Municipalities pump about 5 billion liters of sewage into our rivers every single day. 5 billion liters. That works out to about 200 liters per person per day goes into our rivers every single day. And of that, about 4.3 billion is untreated, completely, totally untreated. So the state is the biggest polluter. Therefore, the state must pay. But however, the state uses our money, so we are paying for the polluter pay principle. That's the first thing I'd say about that. The second thing about the polluter pay is I've been driving a case down here. I live in Port Shepstone area. We've got unlawful sand mining in the Port Shepstone area. I was an expert witness a few years ago in a sand mining case up in the north of KZN, where a mining operation was shut down because of unlawful mining in a river, and we're now trying to do exactly the same in the Port Shepstone area. But despite our very best efforts, we cannot get the department to come and even look at this case, where we can clearly see industrial sand mining on an unprecedented scale, altering the bed blanket flow of a river in contravention of Section 21C and I of the National Water Act, and we cannot get the department to move. So how is that? Is there a corrupt relationship there? Is somebody paying somebody a backhander? They shut down a business in northern KZN, but they don't do it in southern KZN. What's going on? Why is there different application of the law? Or is there some other corrupt relationship going on? So the polluter pay principle is in my view a very blunt instrument. When you apply it to the mining industry, most of the pollution comes after the mine is closed down. Who do you go and actually hold accountable? I know there are activists that are very excited about this. I for one don't think that it's a very useful instrument. I think at best it's a very blunt instrument. Theoretically, it's a good idea. Obviously, it makes sense. If you pollute water, you must pay for it. In fact, the oldest water law in South Africa was promulgated by the Dutch East India Company in 1653 or 54, around about then. It was called Plakkaat 13, Plakkaat number 13. And Plakkaat number 13 was, if you pollute the water, then you've got to pay. So the polluters pay, it's been around with us since the first European settlers came to South Africa, and we still sit today with the situation where it is simply not applied, or where it is applied, it's applied selectively, and therefore it becomes delegitimized.
Yes, Dr. Anthony, we've got about 2 or 3 minutes. Just some final thoughts. Now, I don't think, we have enough discussions on this particular aspect. And this is something that we need to talk about more. And obviously, to talk to experts like yourself to appreciate, where we are as far as water is concerned, water resource management, and more importantly, to highlight what is actually taking place right across the entire world that we could actually benefit from.
Yes, it's always my pleasure to engage with the media. I've been asked, I've willingly done it. And I think it's very important that we must educate the public. And I think the really, really important message is that it must not be a message of doom and gloom. It must be a message of hope. And the message of hope is that water is an economic enabler. And actually, the crisis we have is really a crisis of critical thinking. It's less about the actual availability of water, and it's more about the way we manage water. So we are living in a situation where we must start to hold our elected government officials accountable, because how can we tolerate what Mr. Venter said earlier on, that about 50% of the water we put in a pipeline gets lost to leakage? How is that acceptable? If you're running a business, would you put capital into that business when 50% of your capital is being stolen? How would you do it? It just wouldn't. It's not a viable business. So we have to get back to the very simple basics. We have to hold our elected officials accountable. But above all else, we must never lose hope, because with technology and with capital, both of which are in readily available supply, by putting those together with a vision, and the important thing here is with policy certainty, that's the missing link right now, the policy certainty. But once we start getting that right, then our water problems are going to start going away. I'm convinced of that. But in the interim, in the very short term, I think the people in Gauteng must buckle up their seatbelts. We're going in for a bumpy landing. It's going to be a very difficult period of time until such time as this Eskom crisis has been stabilized, and I don't see that happening in the very, very near to short-term future.
Turton, thank you very much for that, and also for your time. We certainly do appreciate you taking time out. I know you've got a busy schedule, but at Salam Media, we appreciate you've taken time out to be part of this panel discussion this evening. We wish you all the best, and please take care.
Thank you very much.
All the best. Yes, and unfortunately, we lost Petrus Venter earlier on. I'm sure it had to do with load shedding because he froze as well. And we're going to go for a break, and we come back. Still a lot more that we need to talk about on Wednesday nights with myself, Inayet Wadee. Stay with us.